My name is Bruce Caldwell, and I am fortunate to be here having a conversation with Sheila Dow. And Sheila, we've known each other for a long time. I've followed your research for a long time. I know that some of your early research was on macroeconomics, the methodology of macroeconomics, modes of thought. But more recently, you've moved to the Scottish Enlightenment, and particularly David Hume. Could you reflect on your research path, perhaps how you moved from your earlier interest into the ones that you're currently involved with?
Well, my early interest was in macroeconomics rather than methodology, and actually, in fact, international monetary reform. So it's great to be in Bretton Woods and listening to the discussions here. But I became aware of debates among economists which didn't make sense to me. Debates about slopes of IS and LM curves seem to cause more excitement than slopes of curves ought to. So I started digging down below the surface to try to understand what it was that was dividing economists on theory and ultimately on policy. And it continues to the present day. I mean, the crisis situation at the moment in the financial system, the economy and economics clearly requires a lot of understanding, and understanding in particular about why different positions are being offered.
Right.
And I found that that's taken me back also to my initial interest, which is a long-standing interest in Scottish Enlightenment figures.
Mm-hmm. You talked about modes of thought in some of your early work. How might that fit into your understanding of current policy debates or past policy debates?
I think of the concept of mode of thought as being digging down below theory and even methodology in the sense of which methods are used. I mean by digging down, trying to tease out what's in people's minds, probably subconsciously, about what constitutes a good argument, what constitutes the correct meaning of terms, how to conceptualize, how to frame the situation before you even start talking about methodology and theory.
Well, tell us a little about the Scottish Enlightenment and Hume and some of his insights and how that might fit in with some things that are going on today in terms of theory or policy.
Hume, I feel, is a widely misunderstood figure.
Could I just interrupt too? Hume was one of Hayek's great figures, quoted him often, so I'll very eager to hear what you have to say about Hume.
Well, I think Hayek would also agree that he has been widely misunderstood.
I think that's right, yeah.
And I mean, there is the issue of his relation to logical positivism, which I think has been misconstrued. I mean, I think he did influence logical positivism, but that wasn't his intent. But what I've been interested in more recently is his theory of human nature. And that's particularly helpful, I find, in trying to tease out what's going on in terms of discussions about rationality and irrationality. I mean, behavioral economics in its new form has contributed a lot in terms of asking really useful questions about what explains the behavior that led to the crisis and the response to the crisis, and in turn policy. But unlike the old behavioral economics, a lot of the contributors have fallen into the language of rationality as a jewel of irrationality, that behavior falls into one or the other.
Right.
Economics traditionally has focused on rationality, psychology on irrationality. Now it's bringing the two together. But from my own perspective, I find that a rather unsatisfying way of thinking about human behavior to draw that divide.
Right.
It's not in a lot of the verbal analysis of new behavioral economics, but it comes in as soon as it's formalized. It becomes very much central to the analysis, and Hume had a lot to say on that subject.
Hume talked about human nature. How would he respond to these changes that you've just described? Or how would his analysis perhaps take us in a different direction?
Well, he set out on a very similar path, in fact, trying to make sense of rationalism. And it was understanding the limits to rationalism that led to his depiction as a skeptic. But then he came to the conclusion that reason was not sufficient, and therefore he set off in a much more in a constructive way to set off in a different path to try and understand human nature and what actually explains how individuals behave and individuals within society. I mean, that's a very important element in his theory of human nature.
And he certainly influenced Adam Smith, I suppose,
Yes.
quite
Yes.
profoundly.
Yes.
There is an entree into an economic tradition, at least,
Oh, yes.
through the
Yes,
Scottish
very much so.
Enlightenment tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about what things you're doing right now, or what you'll be doing in the future in terms of your research?
Over the last couple of years, I've been focusing very much on the crisis and trying to explore issues of psychology and economics in relation to the crisis, and in particular what that means for policy, particularly bank regulation. But I'm proposing to step back from that and go back to thinking about mode of thought. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so much interesting debate going on. I mean, clearly at this conference there's so much interesting debate going on. Most of it's at the level of theory. Sometimes some contributors talk about methodology. It strikes me that there's still a need to focus also on the meta-methodological level, the deeper level, to try and raise awareness of what's actually underpinning the way people understand the way the economy works, what they think of as reasonable arguments, and really to tease out the possibilities for new economic thinking. I mean, sometimes I see constraints being accepted as if they're immovable constraints, that we have to talk in terms of rationality. We have to aim for one overarching model. But this just reflects one mode of thought. What I'd like to do is go back to mode of thought and try and encourage awareness of among participants about how they're thinking, guiding their thinking, and how they're debating.
Well, certainly as an historian of economics, I share your desire to see different ways of conversing about problems, just having these expand a bit. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.